The film Home Not Home is part of a body of work that involves still photographs. It involves some creative nonfiction. So I work as an artist, and I've done other short films as well as other bodies of still photography, as well as some writing. So it's around a theme that's very close to my heart. It's an experimental film in which I'm trying to evoke the emotion of sort of a sense of comfort combined with almost an uneasy sense of impending trauma or something that's going to happen. And it really draws off of the sense of what happens within war and within conflict, in which home, which should be very much a place of comfort, becomes also a place of either confinement or a sense in which something is going to happen. And so it really evolves around that, and it uses, I work within sort of domestic spaces of home, conjuring up actually stories of what would normally be very sort of happy or comforting occasions, and then combined with the sounds of distant alarms that would evoke a sense of a bombing that's going to happen. I haven't had experience living in a wartime environment. One of the things I'm really working to explore is how we might develop a sense of empathy for those types of situations at a distance. And that this particular film draws off of two experiences that I've had. One is the experiences as a young girl, sort of, growing up in a small New England town with a grandmother who had immigrated from the mountains of Lebanon. And the way in which she would tell me stories, these really wonderful stories, and these stories that really evoked a sense of beauty in terms of, the olive trees and the stone homes and all of this sense of beauty. The other story that kind of goes along with it is when a dear friend of mine was visiting this small New England town where I grew up, and we live diagonally across from a volunteer fire station, and the noontime alarm went off, and for me it was something just very sort of mundane. I was used to it growing up every day of my life, but for her, she went into to a panic attack, which was, it really resonated with the sounds of what was happening when she was crossing over from East to West Beirut during the early 80s, when there was significant bombing happening at that time. Some of the things that I'm thinking about going into a project is some of those ideas of how I want to explore. Is it something that is happening right now that maybe conjures up a memory of certain experiences? And at the core of a lot of my own work, it has to do with that notion of home and what home means, as well as what the notion of ancestral homeland means. And so the video footage, works to create almost that sense of a meditative quality. I think that there is a way in which, growing up in a small town, it could be that somebody hears those sirens and feels, oh, this is sort of part of the overall sense of comfort. At the same time, I think it's my hope that they may realize that maybe in that repeated sense of, as the sirens keep going off, that something's not quite right. I always remember the sirens as being sort of one. It went up and it came down and then it was done. And it wasn't this repeated. Whereas in the Midwest, with the tornado warnings, they keep going, right? And then in wartime situations, they they keep going. In terms of how the piece became what it became in terms of the idea, the piece actually started with this written work of creative nonfiction that I was writing, which was exploring an understanding of identity, and specifically Arab American identity, what it means to be Arab American and what shapes that identity, and that identity is something that's continually evolving, and it's shaped in part by those stories that my grandmother told, and that I listened to as a young girl. It's shaped also by what's going on in the world right now, and that it's shaped by, what's happening in the Middle East and what are images that we see of that world, and so I think that idea came a lot from there. It also came a lot from the there's this book by the late Anthony Shadid, who's was a New York Times journalist at the time of his death, and he also as an Arab American wrote this just amazing memoir about how he went back to his ancestral home in Lebanon and actually rebuilt it, and what that experience was, and based on what were the stories that his grandparents had told, and then what was it that happened in terms of that rebuilding. Now, he had lived a long time back and forth between the Arab world and the U.S. He worked, for a lot of different news agencies, so he had done a lot of reporting. But that book in particular, and in particular what he says about what home means, which really, one of the things that he talks about is that home is not just a structure in the Middle East. It goes well beyond that. It conjures up ideas of family and longing. And this sense that is, like I said, well beyond that notion of the actual structure of a home. And I think there's a way in which home means different things in certain countries than it does here in the U.S. And so the work developed out of that sort of searching for identity, and then reading this memoir that very much resonated with my own experience in terms of that quality of identity. I think what I enjoy most about experimental film is the idea that one can be transported from one place to another, and that there's not only the moving image, but there's sound, and those things together begin to tell or evoke an experience, or evoke a feeling, and that hopefully within this sort of genre of experimental film, there's a level of empathy which may be derived in terms of how we understand ourselves within a particular moment and how we may understand others.